Well, there was a popular hairstyle in the 1980s that has kind of come back a little bit. Some of the young people are readopting this hairstyle today. You guys know what a mullet is, right? I mean, it's usually short up front, a little bit longer in the back. You know how mullets are often described, though? They're called business in the front, party in the back, right? And so today, we're gonna have a little bit of what I like to call a mullet meeting. Because we're going to start with business in the front, all right? So we're going to take care of some business first and get to the other stuff after that. So the business, though, I don't know, I just had to, I'm sorry. But the business up front is talking about membership. And of course, we've been talking about membership over the past few weeks, and we've been giving some of our reasons for it. But I wanted to leave you with a bit of a picture. And so here I have some toy handcuffs. And, I'm not going to be able to get too far because too many clicks on it because apparently I'm huge. But I can kind of lock myself up, and the hope is I'll be able to unlock myself here. But I can assure you that this is really uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable. I feel overly restricted, and I don't feel completely effective, okay? It's just kind of restricting, and I don't like it. I'm gonna take it off now if that's okay with you. I just don't want it anymore. But there's handcuffs, but there's also, there's these things here. Anyone know what these things are? These are wrist wraps, okay? And what these are for when you are like in the gym and you're lifting heavy weights. Right, so anytime you're doing kind of an overhead press or any kind of chest press, now like the handcuffs, these are tight around my wrists, but I don't feel like overly restricted. The purpose of these is to support the structure of your wrist. So there's a supportive thing. I don't feel overly restricted. They're neither comfortable nor uncomfortable, but it's much more comfortable to lift heavy weights with the wrist wraps, okay? The purpose of all of this is to say that I want us to think of membership more like wrist wraps and less like handcuffs. Because there may be some of you that come from a background where membership felt more like handcuffs. It felt like this weird, overly restrictive thing, but here we want it to feel like a thing that's supportive of the structure. Does that make sense? So as we walk through membership, there are benefits of membership, one of which we talked about were clarity, so that we could have clarity especially for leadership to know who we are responsible for and accountable to. And there are, of course, spiritual benefits of membership, that being this sense of mutual commitment with one another, as well as mutual accountability for one another. Because look, I need to be held accountable by you guys. I know accountability isn't always comfortable, it isn't always fun, but we absolutely need it. We absolutely need it, right? So there's mutual commitment, mutual accountability, but there are some practical benefits of membership as well, as we'll talk about here in terms of membership at Apex. Man, my wrists are still hurting from those handcuffs. I tell you, I have a mark here. What have I done to myself? Man. Anyway, benefits of being a member include voting rights. So we've talked about that you will have the ability as a member to vote on things like the budget, voting in new leadership team members, because that leadership team is going to be on a rotation, people aren't meant to be permanent members of that leadership team, so you can vote people in, voting on big ticket items such as naming the church. So you'll have, as a member, voting rights. You have the opportunity, not the guarantee, but the opportunity to lead house church or different ministries. Of course, anyone who's going to be a leader here at Apex, it just kind of makes sense that you would, be a member, as well as eligible to become a leadership team member, as well as priority regarding pastoral care. As we develop a care team, it's not that we don't care about everybody, but our priority and our focus is going to be those who are members, those who we are responsible for, and I hope that makes sense. Now, when it comes to membership of anything, whether it's a membership to a gym, membership of a country club, membership to a wholesale store like Costco or Sam's, there are expectations of membership, right? Anytime there's a commitment, there are expectations. And so a number of expectations for membership here at Apex is going to be, one, a profession of faith. If we're going to give you voting rights, you should be a Christian. We should be on the same page, at least with that basic fact that you are a Christian. We would have an expectation of that you have been water baptized at some point in the past. And here's the thing with this. Baptism in the New Testament was how people publicly declared their faith. That was just it. They knew who was in by those who were made that public profession of faith through baptism. No, baptism is not the mechanism by which you are saved, but it is the mechanism by which you proclaim that you are saved. And so picture this. Imagine an athlete walking into a coach's office, and the athlete says, hey, the owner of this team has invited me to be on this team, and I have accepted being on this team. And the coach says, great, so glad to have you aboard. Here's the jersey, here's the uniform that you will need to play games. And the athlete says, oh, no, I don't wear the jersey, right? I don't wear the jersey. I don't need the jersey to play on this team. And the coach is like, well, that's part of the rules. That's part of how things work here. We need to identify you as a member of our team, and how we do that is through the uniform. And the athlete says, no, that's legalistic. I don't like that rule. The point is, though, again, in the New Testament, baptism was the means by which you would publicly express your faith. So to us, it doesn't make sense that you would publicly identify with Apex if you're not willing to publicly identify with Jesus. Right? So it's not this legalistic thing. We're just simply trying to be biblical here. Third is regular participation. What that means, there's certain aspects of that, such as like attendance. In other words, if your plan is to come on Christmas and Easter, and that's about it, we welcome you on those times, but we would say that membership probably isn't for you, because we want people who are actually committed and part of the everyday and week-to-week involvement here at Apex. And we certainly don't want to give you voting rights if you're only going to come twice a year, right? We don't want you to dictate how things work here when you're not, all that committed. And as well as, in the typical American Christian comes to church about 1.7 times per month. I don't know about you, I don't consider that regular per se, right? And I don't want to put a number on things in terms of what regular means. That's going to be between you and the Lord, but we would just simply encourage regular attendance. We would also encourage regular participation in community life. Community life being house church or missional community or whatever vehicle of discipleship where you are investing in someone and they are investing in you. Some kind of life-on-life discipleship, because let's face it, as great as the gathering is, we're not necessarily getting into the nitty-gritty of one another's life all the time. So we need to have a regular rhythm of being involved in community life so that people know you, they know your struggles, they know what to celebrate in your life. Right, and also things like service, right? In my house, mom and dad and all the children have chores because we all contribute to the mess, we all contribute to the need for chores, so everyone does chores. And so it makes sense that we would have an ethos of service here. Fourth is a doctrinal alignment. We have a statement of faith on our website, and this is basically that we're not contradicting each other, that we kind of agree on a lot of the main things, and you may not necessarily love exactly how things are worded or every jot or tittle, but are those things that you can abide by, if that makes sense. Like, what, that's good, I can live with that. Same when it comes to vision and mission alignment. It's not that experience new life, embrace a new way, and connecting people with Jesus in every area of life. You don't have to think that those are the greatest crafted sentences ever, but we don't want you to have, conflicted feelings about those things, because that's counterproductive. So are you aligned in terms of our mission and vision? Next expectation for membership is a membership class. And guess what? If you make it through today, Congratulations, you've passed the membership class. All right, you've been through it. But in the future, people who would come and want to be members from here on, in the quarters to come, there will be membership classes. And finally, sign and submit a form, just so we can have records, and we have a way of contacting you, and we have it on record that you have declared that you're in. And again, we are working to get those on the website, and hopefully we'll have even printed copies next week. And so we really want to establish, after today, we want you to go home and pray about it. And if you're in, be prepared to sign and submit a form. And we would like to have that completed by February 11th. So once we have that on February 11th, anyone who wants to be a member after that is going to have to wait and take a membership class. Does that all make sense? And if any point of conversation you'd like to have, I'd be happy to have that conversation with you at some point. But so that's the business in the front, okay? That's the short part of the mullet. Now we'll get to the rest of it. Ready? All right. We have been talking over the past few weeks about being a follower and being a disciple of Jesus. And we've mentioned how the goals of a follower of Jesus are intimacy, to be with Jesus, identity, to become like Jesus, and imitation, to do what Jesus did. And 2 weeks ago, we talked about intimacy, being with Jesus, specifically in regards to prayer. And because we believe that prayer is an important aspect for us, always as a church, but especially in this season of our life as a church. And I look forward to next week, we'll be kicking off a series on prayer, zooming in on the Lord's Prayer specifically. But today, we're going to talk about identity, becoming like Jesus, and imitation, doing what Jesus did in the context of church membership. So, identity, become like Jesus. In Luke chapter 6, verses 39 to 40, Jesus says in a parable, "Can a blind man lead a blind man? Will they not both fall into a pit? A disciple is not above his teacher, but everyone, when he is fully trained, will be like his teacher." Again, a goal of a student or a disciple of a rabbi was to become like his rabbi. And when it comes to being followers of Jesus, the fancy theological word for this is called sanctification, progressively becoming like Jesus. We could also call this spiritual formation. And the secret is that spiritual formation is not a Christian thing, it is a human thing. All 8 billion of us on this rock are being spiritually formed. So the question is not whether or not you're being spiritually formed. The question is, what or who are you being spiritually formed into? It's not, are you being discipled? It's who or what is discipling you. We are all being spiritually formed. And so I want to talk about 3 things, and this is not an exhaustive list, but I want to focus in on 3 things that contribute to our spiritual formation. Well, one of those is the stories that we believe. We are, as humans, are shaped by narrative. We are shaped in a lot of ways by the stories we believe, by the lens through which we see the world, and the stories that we believe about it. These stories shape the way we think, the way we feel, and the way we function and behave in the world. For example, everyone in our culture has a story they believe about money. And for many, the story they believe about money is that money could buy happiness. And therefore, that's going to dictate the way they think and believe and live. And they're going to live in such a way as to make as much money as possible because money buys happiness. That's the story that they believe. There's a story that our culture believes about sex, that, hey, since we're just animals and there's no spiritual meaning to sex, just go and do what you like. But then there's also a story our culture believes about identity. Our culture believes that we determine our own identity, or our identity is shaped by the things that we desire. However, the Bible tells an alternative story about each of those things. What the Bible says about money is no, the money is not where happiness, the key to happiness, but money is a tool to be responsibly used for God and his kingdom, to be wisely stewarded. The Bible's story about sex is not that there's no spiritual meaning attached to it, but sex is something that God created for a man and a woman in a covenant of marriage for God's glory, for the intimacy of a one flesh union between a man and a woman, and for the production of children. So that's a different story than the one our culture tells. The Bible's story about identity is not that you make your own identity, but God as the creator, an objective maker of all reality, that he is the one who defines and gives our identity. So when it comes to the stories that we believe, we need to be shaped by truth. We need to be shaped by truth, and a way that we can be shaped by truth is by engaging with biblical teaching. Because we live, out of the 160 whatever hours that we have in the week, most of those are not in the church, right? Most of us are not in a church building listening to teaching. And so we are bombarded by all sorts of stories told in the media, stories told through social media, stories told through the streaming services, stories told through the music we listen to, even stories through advertisement and the commercials. They all have a story. They're all telling a story and are proposing a vision of the good life. And if we're not careful, we can absorb that story without thinking about it. So we need to inoculate ourselves from absorbing those stories by being exposed to biblical truth, which is, in a sense, what we are doing right now and what we do each Sunday. It's part of what we do even in our house churches. It's what we do when we participate in things like Form. It's what we do when we engage with things like podcasts and sermons throughout the week and watching Bible Project videos and other things. And here at Apex, we want to establish more learning environments where we get into the nitty-gritty of things that we can't necessarily cover on stage, things like establishing a finance class. Because again, this is an important part of our lives. Jesus talks about money a lot, and so we want to establish a biblical vision of our finances. Like James and Tamora Whitman have been leading a class called The Messy Middle, talking about parenting. Because remember, we want to connect people with Jesus in every area of life. So we want to engage with biblical truth in every area of life. So we want to be reshaped by truth, reshaped by biblical truth. Because throughout the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 5, we read a number of times. I mean, Jesus is just beating this drum where he says, "You have heard it said, but I say to you." Jesus says, you have heard this as the version of the story, but I'm going to give you an alternative story that's going to reshape you. An Austrian theologian named Ivan Illich says that neither revolution nor reformation can ultimately change a society. Rather, you must tell a new, powerful tale. If you want to change a society, then you have to tell an alternative story. We need to re-engage and re-engage with biblical truth because we struggle with spiritual amnesia. We're going to walk away from this place, and in 10 minutes, we're going to forget everything that we heard, everything that made us go, right? We're going to forget it, and we're going to seep back in to another story. So we need to continue to engage a new story because the thing is about biblical teaching and biblical truth is not about knowledge that is to puff us up. It's about getting it into our heads so that it moves down into our hearts and works its way out through our bodies and through the work of our hands. Yeah. Thank you for that. Connected to truth is we are also shaped by training. We're also shaped by training, and what I mean by training is through a rhythm of practices. A rhythm of practices because whether we like it or not, we are shaped by our habits. Consciously or unconsciously, we are shaped by our habits. I mean, think about your habits. I mean, maybe we don't even recognize our habits. That'd be an interesting inventory to take though, wouldn't it? Like, I mean, what do I do day to day? What is something I'm in the rhythm and habit of doing? Because habits are going to shape you. I mean, think about it. If you have a habit of staying up late every night, like past 1 or 2 o'clock, and you wake up and the first thing you do every day is grab your phone and start doom scrolling, reading all the bad news, do you think that's going to shape you? Absolutely, that's going to shape you. That's going to affect the way that you think and you feel. It's going to affect the way you see the world, because you are, whether you like it or not, you're going to be absorbing the stories, story after story. That's going to shape the way you think, that shape the way you feel, shape the way that you act and your general disposition. You are shaped by your habits. But you would be shaped differently if you got a good night's sleep every night and you, at some point in the day, took a walk and meditated on the things of the Lord. Do you think that that's going to shape you? It's going to shape you differently than staying up late and doom scrolling. It's completely different habits. So we need to be mindful of our rhythms of practices. And we can think of this as training. It says this in 1 Corinthians 9:25. Paul writes, everyone who competes in the games, talking about something like the Olympic Games, goes into strict training. They do it to get a crown that will not last, but we do it to get a crown that will last forever. Therefore, I do not run like somebody running aimlessly. I do not fight like a boxer beating the air. No, I strike a blow to my body and make it my slave, so that after I have preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified for the prize. Man, Paul is intense. Paul is intense, but we have this training language, and here Paul uses this sort of athletic metaphor to talk about, look, every athlete who trains does physical training, but he's challenging us to think about, what does our spiritual training look like? I mean, let's take, for example, the classic illustration of running a marathon. How do you run a marathon? Do you try really hard, or do you train really hard? I tell you right now, if I went out and tried to run 26.2 miles today, I would die after 1 mile, right? It's not through trying really hard. But is it impossible? We need to think about the difference between hard and impossible. Because you could try really hard or you can train really hard. Because over time, I mean, there's all sorts of ways that you can train hard and over time build up to the ability and having the capacity of running 22.6 miles. You might begin though, week 1, you run 1 mile, and you have a rhythm of when you train and when you rest. And then the next week, you might run 1.5 miles, and then 2 miles. I don't know how it goes. If you run a marathon, you're laughing at me right now, going, that's not how it works. But you just add incrementally to it. But then, over time, does running a marathon become possible? Yeah. How? By trying really hard? No, but by training really hard. Hard, but not impossible. Running a marathon is always going to be hard. But it doesn't always have to be impossible. It depends on how you train. John Ortberg says this way. He says, this need for preparation or training does not stop when it comes to learning the art of forgiveness or joy or courage. In other words, it applies to a healthy and vibrant spiritual life just as it does to physical and intellectual activity. Learning to think, feel, and act like Jesus is at least as demanding as learning to run a marathon or playing the piano. I'm certain that many of us have skills, a particular set of skills, that we have acquired over a period of time, but it took time and dedication and commitment and training. But what about our spiritual lives? Have we put the same oomph into that kind of training? So think about it. If you hear a sermon about do not worry and don't have anxiety, and you might go and then that week and you might try really, really hard to not worry and have anxiety. How does that work for you? You can try hard or you can train hard. How can you train hard to not worry? Well, it's about your practices. It's about your habits. Have you developed a habit of, handing yourself over to one biblical truth and to pausing and practicing silence and solitude and prayer and fasting and time in the Bible and practicing gratitude and just meditating on the Lord and his goodness and his faithfulness and just rehearsing the Lord's trustworthiness and faithfulness in your life? Because if you make that a habit, over time, guess what happens? You don't worry so much. And you don't even think about it. Just one day you're just like, I used to worry all the time, but since I've developed new habits over time, I'm not perfect, but I worry way less now than I did before. That's training. That's learning to practice the spiritual disciplines, right? And the thing that we need to be careful about the spiritual disciplines like prayer and reading and fasting and all of that is these are not check off the box things. These are not got tos, these are get tos. These are means by which you get to grow closer in intimacy with God. And in doing so, you're becoming more like him. And this is a need for all of us. Richard Foster wrote a classic book on spiritual disciplines called The Celebration of Discipline, and in it he writes, what the world needs today is not more intelligent people or more skilled people. What we need today is more deep people. And depth is found through these rhythms and practices of the spiritual disciplines. And that's a need for us today. And this has become apparent as I've become aware of this trend on TikTok. I'm not on TikTok, I can assure you, but I've heard about it. And one day there's this woman, this 28-year-old woman, she's walking and she says, you'll never believe this, guys. The other day, my boyfriend challenged me to take a walk without my ear pods or without my phone. And I was like, no way, are you crazy? I'll be sitting there with my worry and anxiety. But you know what? I did it. And the first 2 minutes were really difficult, but after that, it was really good. And so she is claiming that she has started this trend called silent walking. I'm serious. And so now there's all these other, TikTokers going, just taking a silent walk before class. Where I come from, we call that walking. Welcome to the human race for thousands of years, right? But that just exposes that we live in this noisy and frenetic society that we can't even imagine not filling our head with noise 24/7. I can't even take a walk but that just shows us the importance of training ourselves to sit still and be silent and to focus on the things of the Lord. So it's training. There's truth and there's training. And we do this as a community. Well, this is tribe, right? This is tribe. Your tribe is your relational community who encourages one another as we train. Because when someone's running a marathon, it's not empty streets. There's usually people on the sidewalk who are cheering them on and clapping and handing them cups of water, right? And encouraging them. We need to be cheerleaders for each other as we train. It's not about, did you do your devotions? Oh, that's a shame. No, it's about encouraging one another. And so as a relational community, as a tribe, we can experience encouragement because there's just times where we can't break out of whatever story we are fixated on at the time. We need an outside ear, somebody from the outside of us to tell us and remind us of that alternative story, to remind us that things aren't so bad and that there's hope in Jesus. But here's the thing about tribe. Here's the thing about relational community is that not only does it provide encouragement, there's a sense, and then we don't like this, but there's a sense that we're often exposed. Any kind of close-knit intimacy with another human being will lead to exposure. And this is especially true when it comes to marriage and parenting. So let me offer some encouragement for you newlyweds who are thinking to yourselves, man, ever since I got married, I have just been so selfish. Let me tell you something. Becoming married is not what made you selfish. It simply exposed what was there all along. And for you new parents, man, ever since I've had this child, I've just become so impatient. No, Your child does not make you impatient. Your child has exposed that you've been impatient all along. But you know what? That's a good thing. That's God's grace. In other words, pain is a signal that there is something not right within the body. And in the same way as we live in relational community, as we are exposed, our weaknesses are exposed, it doesn't have to stay that way, but we can at least recognize and address it. You can't address a problem until you recognize it. And sometimes it's that exposure that comes through community that begins for us to help begin to recognize it so that we can bring those weaknesses and lay them at the feet of Jesus and experience his grace. So, as it says in Hebrews 3:13, let us encourage each other daily while it is still called today, so that none of you is hardened by sin's deception. We become spiritually formed by truth, training, and tribe. Those are ways in which we can become like Jesus. And as we become like Jesus, as our character is formed, that will allow us to imitate Jesus and do what Jesus did. Because doing what Jesus did is not a matter of trying really hard. It's a matter of truth and training and tribe. So if we want to do what Jesus did, we must become like him through those other means. But as we talk about doing what Jesus did, we read in Matthew 20, verse 28. He says, just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and give his life as a ransom for many. How's that for a mission statement? What does Jesus say about himself? What is his mission? What was his identity in this passage that he says? Jesus comes as a self-giving servant. So if we want to do what Jesus did, we too must become self-giving servants. And that's both within the church as well as outside of the church, becoming self-giving servants. And so before we talked about, truth, training, and tribe, I have 3 more T's for you guys. But these are not T's that I've come up with. You've heard these before. What do you think I want to say? Time, talent, and treasure. We become self-giving servants through time, talent, and treasure. Let's talk about time. What are ways in which we can serve within the church here at Apex? Well, there's a variety of ministries, of course. There's, one that I pointed out before was family life. Let me briefly cast a quick vision for family life through a story. I've told this story before, but in 1855, there was a Sunday school teacher named Edward Kimball. And Edward Kimball had a student, a teenager that he worked with in his Sunday school class, whose name was Dwight. And Edward Kimball said of Dwight, he was the last person I ever expected to come to Jesus. Like simply the most least likely convert. But yet, out of compassion, Edward Kimball went to the shoe store where young Dwight worked, where he was, stocking the shoe store shelves, and Edward Kimball felt compelled to share with Dwight God's love for him and what God had done for him through Jesus. But then young Dwight was moved to tears, and in that moment, he gave his life over to Jesus, and over time, he grew in maturity and in faith, and today, we know him as D.L. Moody, who was the most famous preacher of his time, preaching to hundreds of thousands of people, and was the founder of Moody Bible Institute in Chicago, which has trained thousands of ministers for the gospel. Now, Edward Kimball had no idea the ripple effects that would result of him walking into a shoe store one day. How's that for a vision for family life and serving the children? You never know what impact you are going to have by being a self-giving servant when it comes to serving the children here. But then, of course, there's also the band, there's tech team, there's the the Mission Cafe, there is the welcome team. You know, we really need you friendly extroverts to join us on the welcome team to make this place feel like a warm and inviting space. So let's think of it this way, because no job is too small, okay? It's all important. You know, I shared a quote last week that was in a monastery, I think in the kitchen of a monastery, that said, "Everyone wants a revolution, but no one wants to do the dishes." And speaking of dishes, Mother Teresa says this. She says, when you wash the dishes, you know, when you wash the plate not because it is dirty, nor because you are told to wash it. Wash it because you love the person who will use it next. So as we are serving in family life, as we are running the sound, as we are serving coffee, we do so because we love the people who will benefit from our service. That's what it means to be a self-giving servant. And of course, that happens within the church. It also happens outside of the church. How can we be self-giving servants within our house churches as we reach out to the broader communities? Maybe we throw a block party. Maybe we partner with other ministries like Victory Project. So there could be an out component of your service. But next, we can also be self-giving servants through talent. We've all been given different skills and gifts. Some of us, not me, but some of us are good at carpentry, putting things together and building things. Some of us are good about establishing systems. Some of us are gifted administratively. Some of us are great cooks and able to cook for a large group of people to be able to have a feast. Some of us are artistically gifted. You know, gifted in the arts, and people like photographers and videographers. That's very important because those are things that help us to cast vision and help us to capture the things that God is doing here. Let me share with you from Exodus 31. This is talking about the construction of the tabernacle. Then the Lord said to Moses, "See, I have chosen Bezalel, the son of Uri, the son of Hur, of the tribe of Judah, and I have filled him with the Spirit of God, with wisdom, with understanding, and with knowledge, and with all kinds of skills to make artistic designs for work in gold, silver, and bronze, to cut and set stones, to work wood, and to engage all kinds of crafts. Moreover, I have appointed Aholiab, son of Ahisamach, of the tribe of Dan, to help him. Also, I have given the ability to all the skilled workers to make everything I have commanded you." Within the tabernacle, God gifted the artist to enable them to create a space of beauty and order. Because what the tabernacle is a micro model of the Garden of Eden and creation, where God was establishing a space of beauty and order. So perhaps there are ways in which we can use our skills to make this space a space of beauty and order, because we love the people who will be coming here. How can we use our talents both here within the church as well as reaching out? But then finally, there's treasure. We all love talking about money in church. It's very important, though, because Jesus talked about money a ton. Because Jesus knows the potential of what money does to the human heart. Now, I am not interested in talking about a percentage. I believe that the standard in the New Testament is joyful, sacrificial generosity. That's it. The New Testament is joyful, sacrificial generosity. But I think there's another way I want us to think about it, that by sharing a very, very old story that comes from the beginning of the Bible about Cain and his brother Abel. It says, "Now Abel kept flocks, and Cain worked the soil. In the course of time, Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord. And Abel also brought an offering, fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering he did not look with favor. So Cain was very angry, and his face was downcast." We are not given a lot of details within this passage of, what the expectations were. We don't read anywhere about God commanding a sacrifice or the specifics. There have been people thinking, what's the deal? Why did God like Abel's but not Cain's? And some people think, well, it's because God preferred the animal sacrifice over the vegetable sacrifice. Because clearly tomahawk steak is superior to Brussels sprouts, right? Amen. Right? I don't think that's exactly what it is, because as God establishes a sacrificial system later, we have both animal sacrifice as well as vegetable and sacrifice from the fields, right? But is there another indication from the text that we can look to that give us a bit of insight here? What sort of offering did Cain bring? Yes, vegetables, but what kind of vegetables? Is there any description of it? Just some. He brought some vegetables. Okay, we're not told the quality of the vegetables, just some. What did Abel bring? Yes, Abel brought animals, but what kind of animals? The firstborn. And specifically, what part of the firstborn? The fat portions. In other words, the Bible's way of saying the good stuff. The best portion of the firstborn. And going on from here, God would, when God established the covenant with Israel, he would demand that the firstborn of the flocks would be either sacrificed to him or somehow redeemed. And so Abel, in offering his firstborn of his flocks, is displaying faith, is displaying trust in God, because he could have said, oh, well, this animal just had this animal, but I'm not guaranteed that more animals will come from this animal, so I have to keep this for myself. Maybe if I have another one, then I'll offer it to the Lord, but the firstborn I have to keep for myself. No, it doesn't work like that. Because Abel displayed trust in God by offering his firstborn, and he displays love for God by giving the best part of that offering, the fat portions, the first. So it's displaying trust and love. But with Cain, it's just some fruits. It's not the first fruits. In other words, Cain was like making sure that there would be a first fruits, but that there would be more of a crop. In other words, okay, because God would demand, God later would want the first fruits, because that is a way for us to display trust that he will continue to provide. But for Cain, it was just some vegetables. In other words, his leftovers. God doesn't want your leftovers. And it's not because God's a snob, but it's because when you give your leftovers, that reveals something about your heart. And that also has a way of shaping your heart. And so the question is not just with our treasure. Let's think about all of these. Let's think about of time, talent, and treasure. Are we giving God the fat portions of our time, talent, and treasure? Are we displaying trust and love in the things that we offer to God? And that's a conviction for me just as much as it is anyone else. But that's an important question, isn't it? But I don't want us to feel heavy about it, because, again, it's not about trying really hard. It's about training really hard. It's about, over time, becoming like Jesus. And that's going to be something that's going to have to sink into us. And so as the band comes and as the communion team comes, we will learn to give God our fat portions. We will learn to give God our best when we remember that God did not offer his leftovers. And even if he did, that would be more than enough. God offered to us his best. God offered to us his firstborn. And so here we have the matzah. This is Passover bread that's been made for thousands of years. And I pointed out last time the texture of the matzah. It is bruised and striped and pierced and broken. And on the night that he was betrayed, Jesus took bread, and when he had blessed it, he broke it and gave it to his disciples, saying, "This is my body broken for you. Take it and eat it in remembrance of me." And likewise, he took the cup, saying, "This cup is a new covenant in my blood. Do this in remembrance of me." So as we participate in this today as a tribe, we remember that God gave us his time, talent, and treasure.